So ultimate ambition क्या है? That we understand, we evaluate, and then ultimately we are able to conclude or come to a knowledge, right? Which obviously keeps improving. It is not an absolute knowledge, but we come to a knowledge where we are able to apply this now to make human lives better. अब इसमें भी बहुत सारे philosophical tools हैं, right? Let's first understand. So see, dimensions of ethics. Ab ethics in private and public relation. Now this is also an important dimension, but we have not written it. क्यों? Because ये अलग से लिखा हुआ है, so that's why should we put that effort, right? So already UPSC has written कि भाई एक dimension of evaluation हो सकता है public versus private ethics. Right? Now you write. Give a heading. Right. Another लिखिए. Broad dimension could be. This is institutional. Understand? Broad dimension could be, though इसमें भी individual level पे analysis हो सकता है. A private sector employee, a government sector employee. Evaluation at broad level could be public versus private, right? Now, what is the basic idea behind public versus private? Obviously, you've studied PubEd. It's very easy to understand. What constitutes public? What constitutes private? Public obviously comes from, as you know, the idea of public interest or public, correct? So, idea of public or publicus means which is collective. So public or publicus means collective, social, common, right? Somewhere this reflects the essence of something called public or the sphere of public. See, sphere of public is related mostly to government or state. That is logical. Whereas private sphere relates to what? Now, private can be studied at individual level. That is more of personal. Understand? Article 21. So, private can be understood at two levels. Private, that is personal, and private as a sector. Understand? Personal and private. Private as a sector, private as an individual. So when you say personal space, that is more related to individual, right? When you say private sector, that is more at institutional level as a sector. Now, is this public and private, is it a classification, economic classification, or political classification, or social classification? It is legal, political, social, economic. That's a classification. When you say public, what do you mean? Does it mean only state? No, it also means collective and common. You understand? So this classification of public and private can also be understood in terms of political, social, economic, legal. Right. So the idea, yes, publicness, correct, Pooja. Idea of publicness, an idea of privateness, right? That's a logical idea. So why are we concerned about understanding this now? So when there are people who are working in a context called private, and when there are people working in a context called public, do they have different moral obligations? Do they have different ethical obligations? Let's keep it that way. Contextual हो गया तो moral भी हो गया और ethical भी हो गया, right? So if you say public sector, क्या moral obligations are? What are ethical obligations? Let's use ethical. What are ethical obligations? Okay, ठीक है, citizen, fine है, और क्या? So can we say the moral parameter, right? The moral extent of moral scrutiny for public sector is much higher, much more influential compared to the private sector. Kyun? That's a question now. Why? Because see, every human being in any context, his actions may have repercussions for the society. Ab Union Carbide mein, right? Bhopal gas tragedy mein, if some people made mistakes, or the auditor, the safety auditor did not work properly, or there was something which was a problem hidden by the lower level employees, right? Ultimately, everybody, thousands and lakhs of people suffered because of that. तो क्या private के mistakes से public impacts नहीं हो सकते? हो सकते हैं. That is why we are talking about Whistleblowers Protection Act, extending it to the private sector. But see, the discretion was exercised at the first private level. Try to understand what I'm saying. If a private sector employee acts rashly or acts in self-interest, he may create a consequence which will have larger impact on the public interest. So government was supposed to check it, right? But what is the immediate context of that private sector employee? It is his institution, no? The government comes later on, no? Second level, no? If you are fighting with the rickshawala, the police is not responsible for that. Police can be accountable for that. You understand? Who is responsible for that? You are responsible for that. Right? You understand? So government can be ultimately accountable for anything, right? But that is not how the analysis should be done. Otherwise, we'll miss the finer aspect. We'll miss the real problem. सब कुछ हम government पे blame करते हैं तो real problem कैसे पता चलेगी? So if a private sector employee or an organization or an institution, right, involves in corruption, does something which affects the public interest, right, it should also be held morally responsible. That is why we talk today about corporate ethics. So what is now, let's understand, simplified, what is now the framework to understand that public sector ethics and framework to understand corporate sector ethics? क्या framework है? बिल्कुल. So corporate ethics एक area है, या corporate governance is an area which studies the private sector or develops a framework for the evaluation of the practices and actions and whatever decisions of the private sector, right, which constitutes something good or bad. In government, it is public sector ethics or the public service, or the ethics in governance, which constitutes the framework to understand the government role. So good governance, public service ethics, ethics in governance, right? These are the frameworks which help us understand the public sector values or public sector actions, behavior, or desired actions and behavior. Also, the Companies Act is a legal framework, right, which helps us assess and somewhere define the actions and behavior of the private sector. So public sector or private sector ethics or ethical frameworks, right? We have developed those frameworks. So public versus private is an ethical debate, right, arising out of the fact of the nature of responsibility which both have towards the society. The public is obligated by constitutional philosophy, constitutional moral doctrines, constitutional liability, whereas the private sector is not directly impacted by that liability. So it's not impacted by it. Fine. So you obviously that the public sector जो है, it will have a bigger frame of scrutiny. It is subject to the public evaluation, right? It is subject to the collective evaluation of the society, whereas private sector or its obligation may be more contextual. So what should be or what should be the adequate, basis of evaluation of these two? So एक simple basis आता है, citizens interest versus customers interest, citizens interest versus client interest, collective interest versus customer interest, right? That comes as an important idea. Then the idea of stakeholdership. Who are the stakeholders in public sector? People, government, administration, puri politics, puri society. Who are the stakeholders in the private sector? Shareholders, correct? Customers हैं, right? Shares जिन्होंने खरीदे हैं to an extent, right? Those who are promoters, those who are founders to a large extent. And probably its own contractual obligations. Who be stakeholders are contractors, vendors, right? All those people who are supplying or who are part of this entire supply chain management. So all those who are involved in business operations, right? And the goods and services which this business serves to a specific client or customer, they all become the stakeholders. So one of the biggest or the most important control over public is exercised by what? Constitution. But generally, wherever the constitution is. So constitution or constitutional values, right? They are the controlling factor. Whereas for the private sector, it can be the regulatory bodies or regulatory framework, which again somewhere is derived from the constitution only. So both work somewhere in a statutory, constitutional, regulatory framework, right? ये तो करते हैं दोनों काम. Then how, right? How the obligation of one is bigger than other? How is it made sure? No. It is made sure through legislative control. That's the biggest difference. If the private sector is governed by the statutory laws, then also legislature will control it, right? But there is no direct role of legislature in guiding and controlling and scrutinizing and making the private sector accountable. But legislature has the direct control over the public sector, right? Or government, what you can say. That is one of the biggest control. Even though judiciary has control over both. Legislature, yeah. No, judiciary I said later. Legislature has control, and I said even though judiciary has control over both, right? But that also control is not equivalent. You understand? Judicial control over public is much, much higher compared to judicial control over private. Why is that? Now, when we talk about fundamental rights, when we talk about the specific, constitutional provisions which make the public sector conscious of citizens' interest, the biggest one of the most important is fundamental right. US हो, UK हो, और भी countries जहाँ भी हैं, right? The rights are a very important means to enforce public accountability. But why? These rights do not constitute the element of private sector. When you're defining the state, you're not defining the private sector into that. Why not?
Not having actual control and liability for the action of private.
See, because private individuals or private sector also fall under the domain of fundamental rights. It is their rights also which needs to be protected. And at the same time, it is not the private sector which is obligated to protect our rights, it is the government. But this is an important debate. When we are talking about public-private partnerships, when you're talking about mandatory CSR, India is one of the few countries in the world which has mandatory CSR. Is it ethical or unethical? How can be both? How it can be both?
It can be moral.
It's more moral than ethical. It should be more moral than ethical, right? Kyun? Correct logic. If it is moral, it will be voluntary. If it is ethical, it becomes legal and rational. But ethical क्या search करता है? Scientific, empirical, rational. So हम बोलते हैं through a law we are enforcing it. It's ethical as well as legal. So we are trying to make it ethical through law, right? But the moment we are using law and making it compulsory, it undermines the entire idea. That if something is so important, if something is so, or you can say necessary, if something enforces the responsibility and accountability, right? Then why it had to be enforced legally? Why it has to be made compulsory? Why not allow them the opportunity to exercise their commitment to the public service or citizens' interest themselves? So, two questions arise होते हैं. That can they be allowed to voluntarily contribute to the society, right? If they are allowed to voluntarily contribute to the society, it will take into account the special circumstances in which they operate. आज business अच्छा है, कल नहीं है. Unlike government, they are not getting the money from Consolidated Fund of India, no? But on the other hand, if you make it voluntary, will they be willing to comply considering they want profit? So this is a dilemma. See, don't say ethical and ethical. ये क्या है? Ethical dilemma है. Which aspect is supposed to be more ethical? We are not able to choose, right? Both seem to be ethical. That through law also it is good, and through voluntary also it is better. Which one to choose from? Have you dilemma? Fine. So it is quite logical that there are several aspects of public and private which cannot be understood as this versus that. We have to understand that eventually both work in the same society or in the similar context or in the same territory or domain, and both have certain obligations. Because public sector is enjoying a lot of authority, public sector is enjoying a lot of protection and privileges and whatever, and that is why they need to have more obligation. They need to have consequent obligation and not the private sector. But private sector cannot avoid its moral, human obligation, right? That it cannot avoid. It may not be responsible for everything, right? But at least it should be made responsible or held responsible for the actions which create the impact on the public interest, on the consumer's interest, on the customer's interest. If it happens, then they have to take an obligation, right? और ये obligation legally binding भी हो सकता है और voluntary भी हो सकता है. Understanding? So this is a debate. The corporate governance, corporate ethics in the era of globalization, right? And the public sector ethics, how they can be made compatible to each other. Because when we talk about, let's say, electricity distribution, the private sector companies which are involved in the electricity distribution, they are facing losses, right? Government has allowed this opportunity for them to come. Why will they continue in this process unless they have certain profit? And when we say profit, don't take it negative, because it is the profit which will run their enterprise. The profit is not being used for some entertainment or consumption purposes. If they don't have surplus, they cannot operate. It's same way the government cannot operate without surplus. So electricity distribution एक area है, for example. Transportation एक ऐसा sector है where private sector is doing better than the government sector. Telecom एक ऐसा sector है, private sector is doing better than government sector. Infrastructure is there which is doing better than government sector, right? But there are, let's say, various dilemmas in that. There are a lot of toll roads in India which are operating since last 15-20 years now. They have recovered their cost many times more than that cost. Still, the operation of these toll roads are continued and people are still paying money. This public-private partnership should not become an excuse for the public to evade its responsibility. Once you have recovered 4 times, 5 times the cost, 6 times the cost, now whatever is going is excessive profit in the hands of the private sector. Anyway, that's true. So there is a utility which is a public utility which was created by the private sector, right? And the private sector was duly paid in terms of 5 times the profit which they earned or 5 times the investment which they made, and still they are continuing to earn revenue out of that. What is this? Ethical or unethical? Unethical. On what logic? See, on the logic that once the private sector has recovered its cost of operation and the consequent profit out of it, now this utility should be handed over to the government. And if people are paying money for that, then government should take the revenue and government should operate or take the responsibility. Otherwise, why government is maintaining a ministry of road transport and highways? Maintaining of that ministry also requires cost. एक पूरी ministry और department, पूरी bureaucracy maintain कर रहे हो, उसके लिए तो पैसा चाहिए. And it is just one toll I am talking. There are numerous like that. But government would have come into contract with the private sector that okay, you can operate for next 15 years. You understand? Obviously, they cannot go back on contract. That may also be an obligation. So it is obvious that private sector should be incentivized. Only then it will try to contribute to public interest. So there are various issues which arise when we think of the today's modern era, like we said, globalization and technology, new liberal era. When we think of the market-based economic systems, liberal economic system, वहाँ पे government और market का association या coexistence has to be understood with respect to ethical framework, because it creates lot of ethical dilemmas. Consumer rights needs to be protected because he is also a citizen, right? Customers' rights are necessary to maintain the integrity and trust of the private sector. How this customer right could be protected? Judicially, through tribunals, through statutory means, through other administrative adjudication, through whatever process. Now that also has to be understood, that which one makes it more easy, makes it more faster, makes it more trustworthy and transparent. ये भी तो चाहिए. Grievance redressal mechanism, complaint resolution mechanism. Now government is also already performing a lot of commercial functions. So should they be treated at par with the private sector? They should. Why not? When they are performing commercial function, they should have the same level of scrutiny, same level of compliance, same level of efficiency as the private sector, because they are performing commercial function. If you do that, there is again a dilemma. If government protects its own enterprise and says they are accountable to legislature, to parliament, to judiciary, fine. But then what about the efficiency? सिर्फ accountability चाहिए, efficiency भी चाहिए. Efficiency भी चाहिए. That is why we have commercialized the government function. If you don't have efficiency, then the entire idea is defeated. You establish a ministry and run it through the ministry. So a lot of issues arise when public-private come into interaction. So here the part, it is mostly related to that, right? Now see, next is human values. Lessons from the lives and teaching of great leaders, reformers, administrators, role of family, society, and education institution in inculcating values. It is obvious that values are the starting point of understanding the ethical or unethical behavior. Values percolate deliberately. They also percolate non-deliberately. So how you define value? Value, what is the basic definition of value?
These are the reflection of our belief.
Correct. Reflection of belief, attitude, right? What I hold dear to me, what I don't hold dear to me. Tradition, culture, right? Now let's say. Oh, black. Let us say that सबसे basic debate, food, right? Marriage. Love versus arranged. Fine. और fine, अब एक form ये भी है. Now basic debate, see, preference for vegetarian food, non-vegetarian food. How do one gets oriented to these two things? Belief है, ठीक है. Belief है कि ये करना चाहिए, right? But एक दिन by mistake you eat this. Let's say by mistake you eat it. Right? By mistake you eat it, and then you start realizing, right? Hedonism comes into you. कि भाई इसका taste तो बहुत अच्छा. And obviously I'm not the one who's killing it. I'm not the one directly who's producing this meat, right? I'm only an end buyer. And like me, there are crores of people who are buyers. 70%, 80%, 90% global जो societies हैं, वो non-vegetarian है. Hardly 10-12% ही vegetarian है, pure जिसको बोला सकता है. Now your logic, right, somewhere helps you justify what you have done. What you are holding on to, that belief has given way to the taste. That means what? Utility ने किसको overshadow किया? Belief को. नहीं? कर दिया ना? We cannot generalize it, but it can happen. It happens. See? Now see, logically, you may choose, or you may born, or you may exist with certain choices. Right? But you may not continue with those choices permanently. Understand? That means there are choices that you have made in your life. There are preferences that you have developed in your life, right? And these preferences may not be permanent unless they require reinforcement. Now, the moment you're eating this, your mother comes and says, right? Or suddenly your mother's picture comes in front of you, right? With a knife or balan in her hand, and then you realize, okay, fine. हो सकता भी नहीं, तो इसीलिए मैं आंखें बंद करके खाता था कि ऐसा कुछ होना मेरे साथ. फाइन. सो लॉजिकली, राइट, यू मे चेंज योर वैल्यूज, बट अब लेट्स से वैल्यू नहीं बोलते उसको, ठीक है, चॉइस बोलते हैं, प्रेफरेंस बोलते हैं. फाइन. टू लार्ज एक्सटेंट, सिंप्लीफाई, लेट्स सिंप्लीफाई. सो दिस मे चेंज, बट यस, बिकॉज इट हैज बीन रीइंफोर्स्ड अगेन एंड अगेन, अगेन एंड अगेन, अगेन एंड अगेन, अगेन एंड अगेन, अब वो क्या हो चुका है? हैबिट हो चुका है. हैबिट. तो जो प्रेफरेंस थी, चॉइस थी, वो हैबिट हो गई. It has become habitual. Habit means of habit, or of doing permanently, of doing regularly. That's habit. So you are doing it now. You're doing it subah, sham, din, raat. You're eating the same food, right? Same type of food, and somewhere it becomes a habit. Now, why you're not preferring this food? It's not because there is some ideology or value system, right? That choice, that preference has now been converted into an involuntary action called habit. अब वो normal हो गया आपके लिए. Fine. You've seen people, like, they become habitual to certain things. So if you're eating something, right, every day, right? So even if you don't want to, and you're crossing through that place, you will stop and you'll eat at least something.
So one of my friends was a vegan. He lost a tournament. He was vegan and he ate chicken
once. Then he started liking it. It happens, right? Or it can happen because of conditions, right? So many times, like, we were studying, it in like the hostel food, the veg food which they were making. So we started trying non-veg. Somebody told us, okay, fine, you start with egg, you start with this, you'll start like, we didn't like the vegetarian food, right? Gobi, aloo, matar, dal, rasam, sambar, whatever, every day. So we started eating it, and we started preferring something. Once you ate it, then you said, अच्छा ये chicken egg का थोड़ा higher version, अच्छा ठीक है, वो भी taste करो. Why? The reason is that we are not looking it in the raw form. we are looking at in a processed form. So comes this next idea. Then whenever we make choices, whenever we have preferences, when something becomes a habit, right, it has been aesthetically visualized by us. Aesthetic visualization. The moment we start visualizing the butcher cutting that animal, right, probably we'll start dissociating from it. But what we do, we neglect that part. You understand? It could work both ways. Some people may be excited by it. So we are eating something, right? Like people go to Malaysia, crocodile's meat. Snake, crocodile. In Northeast, they eat a lot of things, right? Many other states they eat. Kerala. And likewise. So Kerala ka beef curry बहुत famous है. Beef parotha is very popular. So see, they have preferences, right? Obviously, food preferences में moral evaluations कई बार illogical होते हैं. क्यों? Because your food preference was developed primarily because of your geography and climatic conditions. People who are living in colder conditions would prefer to have warm meat. Obviously. They need to have higher temperatures of the body, or they will be alcoholic in nature, or they'll prefer normally alcohol with food. But the same lifestyle cannot be adopted by someone who is living in a semi-arid or arid zone or sub-temperate areas. It is not possible. So they might have developed something. Let's say in Rajasthan, they eat a lot of mirchi, lot of spicy food. But you understand the nature of the climate. Why they eat a lot of mirchi wala food? Why they are eating so much of mirchi? Huh? Mathania ki mirchi.
Keeping them satisfied longer.
सिर्फ टेस्ट नहीं है. क्या होगा फिर मिर्च खाने से? Sweating more. Sweating gives a sense of coolness, right? That can be one physiological, right? Plus cultural tradition. वो areas mostly correct. Availability is one reason, right? But see, it's not necessary where it is available, people will eat it there. Fine? So, ये logical है that people, the traditional culture, those areas generally were associated with bravery, with fight, right? With a lot of issues related to, imperialism, violence, acquisition, and likewise. So see how these royal families would distinguish themselves, right, in terms of the food habits from the common masses. So either वो बहुत घी वाला खाना होगा, rich food, you understand? Or it will be some unique experience which others may not be able to enjoy. A lot of influences may be there, but see, the logic is that there are various factors behind it. Or there would have been a rasoiya who would be making such food and it would have been tasted well. They would have continued with that. Correct? Geographical condition, right? Availability, tradition, culture, value system, बहुत चीजें integrate हो गई, right? बिरयानी अभी कैसे popular हो गया? It's become a common food now. See? And you are getting diverse type of biryanis. But we are making pulao. We are making tehri, we are making pulaos, we are not making biryani. But biryani tag gave the food or the same thing, right, a better outlook, a better aesthetics, a better appeal. Right? In food. So if you say, even if you eat bun tikki, you will go and say, I have eaten burger. You'll never say, I have eaten bun tikki, right? Because it does not have commercial credibility, it does not have aesthetic value, it is not associated with high-end taste, right? If you go to any 5-star and you order the, what is that? Pani puri. They'll destroy everything. If you're making pani puri, right, just like a green tea, we are not going to have it. हाइजीन का मतलब क्या है? टेस्ट थोड़ा खत्म होना चाहिए. टेस्ट तो वही होना चाहिए जिसके लिए पानी पूरी खाया जा रहा है. So, right, leave it. So when you develop a habit, there is a preference. The preference becomes crystallized, confirmed, reconfirmed. It becomes a habit. It becomes involuntary in nature. You get up at 5, get up at 5. Habit हो गया, you will get up. Whether you do anything or not, you will get up. See, right? But that is more related to your bodily functions. That is more related to your physical attributes. That is more related to your material existence. Understanding? So habit है meditation की भी, लेकिन पहले start कहाँ से हो रहा है? एक physical posture से. You understand? Later orientation has changed, right? Biryani was the food for the soldiers, right? That was the logic of the khichdi also. Correct. Because ऐसे जो food होते हैं जो rice based या carbohydrate based food होते हैं, right? For example, rice if you say or paddy, what they do, they expand after they are cooked. So that is logical. They can feed more people, right? So, and plus those spices, those whatever you add, right? There was more fulfilling, easy, logistically easy, make banana easy. बहुत सारे factors हो सकते हैं किसी चीज. Fine, but let's say it becomes a custom or habit. It's quite different. Something starts as a taste or a preference, becomes a habit. Habit becomes more or less involuntary in nature. So when you develop habits, right, and then when you start now again comparing one habit with the another habit, फिर से आता है क्या आता है हाँ value preference of this over this, right? So जैसे आप habit या physical attributes या material existence को आप more and more you try to nurture it over a period of time, it somewhere starts being accepted, right? Mentally, intellectually. Now these physical attributes or material existence becomes more intellectual, ideological, or something what you call intrinsic value. You understand? Intrinsic value. Intrinsic value क्या होता है? When things become eternally part of your behavior. Intrinsic value. Though it has been acquired over a period of time. तो वो internalize हो गया, intrinsic हो गया. Now that becomes part of your thought process, your attitude, your opinion, your point of view. अब वो आपके part हो चुका है. So you can imagine this way that without it now you cannot think or understand anything. When this is applied to the larger society, community, bigger units, it becomes custom, right? It becomes practice, it becomes convention, it becomes tradition, it becomes mores. Understand? Same चीज अगर मैं bigger unit पे apply करता हूँ तो क्या हो जाएगा वो custom हो जाएगा. Usage उसका बार-बार usage becomes custom or conventional in nature. Why it will be done? Because it has to be done. We are not questioning why it has to be done. We are simply telling it has to be done.
So this is like the framework through which you judge your take your actions.
That is what we are saying. But value सिर्फ इतनी simple चीज नहीं है ना कि सिर्फ आप एक preference को उसमें add कर दें, right? Value is a complicated aspect. It has ideology, right? It is a habit. From habit, it emerges, moves into a dominant value system in your life. Then from there, it moves into an ideology. It can go into anything, right? Terrorists कैसे trained होते हैं? ऐसे तो होते हैं. But they are told to value something intrinsically more than something else. So how do you trigger this? Right? आप visually trigger कर सकते हो, intellectually trigger कर सकते हो, materially trigger कर सकते हो, right? किसी और तरीके से trigger कर सकते हो. Any medium you can use, right? But it should appeal to what? Your internal value system or internal preference. Are you getting? That is why the more liberal one becomes, or to become more liberal, one has to be rational. If one is more rational, right, the biasness in terms of values or any other things are eliminated. That is why you don't hold preference of one over the other when you are rational. So this is called secularization process. Right? वो सब में obviously इतना easily होता नहीं है. Fine. So you develop something called intrinsic value. अब intrinsic value क्या है? An extreme, let us say, sense of attachment, an extreme sense of importance, extreme sense of worth for something. So when you say in our society there is inherent regard for traditions, customs, parents, elders, guardians, ये क्या है? Intrinsic value system. We don't need to learn it from someone. It has become somewhere part and parcel of our existence now. Right? Now see, so these intrinsic values will somewhere develop the attitude, the orientation in which we act, behave, evaluate things, right? But now see, this intrinsic value we carry everywhere we go. But this body, this mind, right? This intellect is also exposed to new things, new issues, new aspects, right? So let's say my value system was based on my conservative traditional ideas or whatever I had experienced till now. Now I go for a bigger experience. I see people dying. I see something happening where my own value system comes in conflict with the other values. Or my own value system or its sense of worth seems to be much less compared to the other value. Then what will I do? I will internally come in conflict with the values. That is, my intrinsic values will now be scrutinized, will now be conflicting with the extrinsic values. Extrinsic क्या है? Which are external to me, which I am experiencing, which are arising from the other factors, outside factors. So if I believe in my religion and I'm religious fanatic, right? But the moment I have experiences now which somewhere require the larger understanding of human rights, right? Of morality, of peace, right? Of coexistence, of secularism, of happiness, whatever. So my intrinsic value will start questioning my orientation. Or this external value will start questioning my intrinsic value, which in turn will start questioning my value system or my the culture or the tradition from which I have learned all this. So that will come in conflict. And that is why, see, we have to understand that if we understand how values shape our action, behavior, thinking, learning process, and so many other things, whereas value itself is a consequence of learning, right? How, if we are able to understand this, analyze this psychologically, behaviorally, right, intellectually, physically, physiologically, biologically, अगर हमें ये समझ में आ जाता है, तो हम क्या कर सकते हैं? If we want to leave certain types of values, we can do that. If we don't want to become slaves to those values, we'll do that. If we don't want to become servant to that ideology, we'll be able to do it, though it will take time. It's not easy. See, the children, today's children now, more or less, what you call the Gen Z, most of these people do not have sense of gratitude because they've never learned it. Fine. So when I see kids 13, 14, 15, 17 today, right? Many of them, they are transactional in nature. I'll do this if you give me this. Finish. Now he's not concerned about that somebody is making me available something with effort and not just because I'm paying someone. And not just because I'm someone's child, right? Or not because I'm this sister's son, right? This is he's my mother's brother, and that is why he's providing me. It is his obligation. See, that's sense. Your child will ask for something, you give it to him, he'll feel this is his obligation. That's correct. It's an obligation, but an obligation does not require me to serve something in the same way as you want. The obligation is only for the basic necessities. That can be considered as natural obligation. But anything beyond that is comfort, is luxury that you are providing. And for that, obviously, person will put an effort. So why they are losing a sense of gratitude? Because they have been born in this era, right? Where materialism is the basis of, only materialism is the basis of success. 20 years earlier, people were born in the era where materialism and value system were also the basis of success. 20 years before that, people were born in the era where value system was dominantly undermining the material. Before that, it was only value system and not material. See, it has changed. But still now, the Aristotle's idea can be enforced here. Why they are ungrateful? So when they do this, they are creating a generation which is much more ungrateful. So they are going to experience the same, probably in a bigger magnitude. Bigger magnitude, they will experience the same. Such children will definitely, the moment they have the means and resources, they will definitely leave their parents and say, fine, your life is over now, this is my life to enjoy. So you continue with your life. If I have any economic contribution, I will make it. And this has happened in many of the urban areas in this country, which were much more urbanized than the other areas. You see, Bombay is a very professional city, very professional, right? If you pay the right price, you can have the best service for anything you want. Anything at your doorstep. That is how Bombay is, right? Generally, they are not the people who will cheat you. There is a lot of professionalism, right? They take this as professional pride. They don't manipulate. They directly ask for the money, right? Transaction, that if I'm giving you this, I need this. Simple. And they value that. Time, resource, they value it. Come to Delhi. Everybody, right, everybody is smart. Everybody feels he's very smart. Nobody takes or accepts such an obligation called professionalism. They're not ops. Landlord, tenants, anyone. Nobody is, right? Professionalism. See, you cannot trust people with so many things. Why? Because here the dominant values are. See? Where is that political value? Somewhere here. See? Political attitudes. Delhi dominantly capital है, politically बहुत active है, right? यहाँ पे political values dominant है. Political values क्या है? Power, conflict, right? And lack of responsibility. See? I will crush the other one. Right? I'll do some jugaad. I have some means. I will have some reference. So they are obsessed with these things only. Nobody wants to talk straight. Nobody wants to solve the matters. तो जिसको बोलते हैं सूडो सेंस ऑफ पावर, वो यहाँ पे है. बॉम्बे इकोनॉमिक ड्रिवन है. मनी वहां भी एक बिग ड्राइवर है, नो डाउट. बट सी, दे बिलीव कि दैट ओके फाइन, द की टू इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ इज प्रोफेशनलिज्म. 10% चीट वहां भी होंगे, सब होंगे, राइट, बट यहाँ पे 90% है, वहां पे 10%. If you follow the proper professional guidelines, right, more or less, you will not be cheated. And that too happens in 10-15% cases. That happens everywhere, wherever human beings are. But in Delhi, this is most likely to happen. So they will take the money, आपका admission हो जाएगा, paper मिल जाएगा, ये सब यहाँ चलता है बहुत. Why? This is called the free rider mentality. Understand? मेरा father वो है, उसका भाई वो है, उसका वो है. See? And this is not dominantly BJP's impact. This is dominantly Congress impact. The Congress has always worked with this idea. Fine? Creating a nepotism and favoritism nexus between the political party and the society. That is what it has done. BJP mein that is not visible much. Why? Because obviously they have more or less dominant influence of RSS. So there are certain other parameters which they follow, right? RSS, whatever be its nature, it is one of the bodies which is mostly concerned with making the party accountable for most of the things. For Congress, there is no such thing. 2-3 people are there who will make the party accountable for everything. That's illogical. So जितना भी ये kickback है, bribery है, payout है, ये सब Congress का process है. But the best thing is that corruption is everywhere. What Congress does, right? It creates a sense of, accessibility to everyone. Corruption जो है generalized है, available है easily, work हो सकता है, and more or less no one seems to be deprived of this benefit. अब इस पार्टी में corruption की accessibility कुछ ही लोगों को है. बाकी सब लोग लॉ फॉलो करें, रूल फॉलो करें, राइट, बट कुछ लोग जो हैं वो सब कुछ उनके पास है. नाउ दैट सीम्स टू बी एलिटिस्ट, इवन दो दिस शुड नॉट बी एलिटिस्ट. So when middle class and the lower class gets more benefit and seems to be more accessible or more accessible to certain services and goods and whatever, right, that creates a better sense of social balance, right? This does not create a sense of social balance. यहाँ पे ये कि तुम मेहनत करो उतना रिवॉर्ड मिलेगा, राइट? अब लोगों को ये पसंद नहीं है. क्यों पसंद होगा? You are taking taxes from us and you are giving subsidies. You are taking taxes from us, but you are not giving utilities. You are making unnecessary utilities, which obviously we may not require now. भैया आप हमसे पैसा लेके आप बोलो मैं बना रहा हूँ लॉजिस्टिक सपोर्ट सिस्टम, देश को फायदा होगा, नो डाउट, कंट्री विल बेनिफिट, बट हु आर द डायरेक्ट बेनिफिशियरीज? ऑल दोस पीपल हु हैव डेवलप्ड कंपनीज ऑफ लॉजिस्टिक्स. द मिडिल क्लास एंड द लोअर क्लास इज नॉट पार्ट ऑफ दैट. Right? How many of us own big companies? How many of us own big corporations, big organizations, or we are vendors for bigger companies? We are not. So normally middle class, right? Lower class जो है daily wages और normally manual work करती है या salary पे काम करती है, और middle class generally educate होता है, और क्या करता है? Both are not getting direct benefit from this government. That's a problem. So political values, see, they shape what? They shape the collective values of a particular area, right? Which may be distinct from the rest of the area. And this, when it comes in conflict with your values, right? What it happens? It creates now the opportunity for the entry of new values, which you start evaluating. If I find my intrinsic values, my values are not that adequate, they are not enough to deal with these problems. अब मैं क्या करूँ? New values adopt करूँ. So see, neoliberalism, communism, capitalism, other ideologies, right? How do we imbibe them? How do we make them inherent to our attitude, inherent to our nature? It is only through this analysis. Sometimes we are predisposed. अब उसके कुछ लोग बोलते हैं कि भाई जेनेटिक्स भी इंपॉर्टेंट है, जेनेटिक्स भी रिस्पॉन्सिबल है. सो इन एथिक्स, राइट, एक सिंपल डिबेट ये भी है कि भाई इज जेनेटिक्स इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर अ पर्टिकुलर काइंड ऑफ प्रीडिस्पोजिशन? जो बच्चा 10th जनरेशन पैदा हो रहा है कम्युनिस्ट चाइना में, क्या उसका प्रेफरेंस कम्युनिज्म होगा? बिल्कुल होगा. क्यों? So we cannot say that human body is not organic in nature. It is. Human physiology is organic in nature. So we are not saying that person is Abhimanyu, he has learned from the womb, right? But the logic is that the moment somebody comes into a society and there has been generations and generations of ideology behind it, what happens? It is believed that a part of the ideology has already been nurtured into the child. क्यों? क्योंकि चाइल्ड जब पेट में होता है तो भी कॉन्शियसनेस होती है उसके पास. जब वो पैदा होता है तो भी कॉन्शियसनेस होती है. वो अलग बात है, ही इज इनटू अ वूम एंड सडनली इट कम्स आउट, ही गेट्स अ शॉक. But you cannot dissociate, right, the child's consciousness and his learning when he's in the womb and when he comes out, right? Technically, he doesn't forget everything. या तो वो सब कुछ भूल जाता, लेकिन वो नहीं भूलता. So it is obvious that when mother eats something, it goes to the child. Mother reads something, why it doesn't go to the child? It will. So एक set of scholars हैं, right, जो ये बोलते हैं कि नहीं, blood बहुत important है, right? Ethical premises, value system, they also move through blood, genetic material, DNA, generation to generation. जैसे हम बोलते हैं warriors, अब warriors कौन है भाई? अब warriors सिर्फ एक generation में warriors नहीं है ना, they are warriors in different generations to generation. How they can become warriors? One, obviously they socially learn it, right? But other aspects is what? It is said that is genetic, right? Impact. There is genetic intelligence which is carried by the genes. So obviously एक बच्चा कुछ learning के साथ तो आता ही है, नहीं? उसको पता है ना भूख क्या होती है, रोना क्या होता है, हंसना क्या, उसको कैसे पता रोना है भूख के लिए? That's already designed, you know. इसको हम बोलते हैं bio networking, bio intelligence. Fine. Okay. So see, we'll continue with this tomorrow, right? We asked you. So we'll whatever you've written, read it, think about it, right? So we'll start with here. We'll deal with this, and then we'll put some questions, and then we'll keep writing. जहाँ जहाँ जरूरत है हम सब लिखेंगे. Don't worry. See you then tomorrow. 12:15 can be the time, because some students have again class after this. I also have a class, so we can keep it this way कि भाई बहुत ज़्यादा break now. See you then tomorrow. Take care. Read it and come.